experienced head coach doesn't necessarily equate to success later on. Looking at some of the Super Bowl storylines that I want to break down with Adam and Blease, this being the Andy Reid Super Bowl and what kind of factor that could play. Obviously, Andy Reid spent a number of years in Philadelphia, took his team to 4 consecutive NFC championship games and a Super Bowl that he eventually lost to the New England Patriots in 2004. But his time with Philly ultimately ran out. He was fired, moved on to Kansas City, has built a powerhouse there, especially with Patrick Mahomes over the last few years. Adam, do you think Andy Reid's presence in this game gives any kind of advantage? I know it's something that will be hyped up throughout the week, but do you think when the game actually kicks off that you mentioned the stats just a moment ago, experienced head coaches don't necessarily have an advantage. Do you think Andy Reid necessarily has an advantage going up against a former franchise that he's coached for?
I actually think Andy Reid probably has more pressure on him in this game than Nick Sirianni does. They've been experienced. This is the 5th straight year now Kansas City's been to the AFC Championship game. This is the 3rd time in the Super Bowl, 2-2 before with 1 Super Bowl win. I think they have the more pressure on them. They're the more experienced team. They're the ones coming in, obviously, with injuries and stuff aside. I think they're the ones with the pressure on them. Sirianni's coming in with this game with a hot football team. You know, they can play loose. They can play fast. I think he has read some articles this week about he has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder that he wasn't retained when Andy Reid was brought into Kansas City, and he had to move on and come back full circle here now with the head coaching position in Philadelphia. But yeah, I think there's a lot of angles here to Andy Reid against his old franchise, but I don't think that really has much to do with it. He's been cemented in Kansas City for quite a while now. But I do think that the pressure is on Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs, and Sirianni and the Eagles can come in this game and play a little bit looser, to the Super Bowl game and maybe take a little bit more chances where Andy Reid's going to have more of a focus on him because he is the experienced coach. He's been to the AFC Championship game the last 5 years and has won a Super Bowl a couple of years ago. So to me, I think Andy Reid and the Chiefs have a little more pressure on them than Philadelphia Eagles with Sirianni and his coaching staff.
It's so interesting to me because I find that Nick Sirianni is one of the biggest tools in the NFL. He often is posing for the camera. He gives unbelievable comments in his lead up press conferences in the week, in his post game press conferences, and yet that story about him not being retained. Someone else mentioned that to me. I don't know why that's considered a big deal. That's very common in the NFL. A new coach doesn't want to retain talent of a previous administration. It doesn't surprise me. I don't know why it would be such a tipping point, a point of advantage. I do understand that Nick Sirianni, he showed his team 8 Mile before one of the playoff games. It kind of speaks to who he is. He's trying to find any edge possible, and whether that's effective or dorky or toolish at times, it's just his style. I don't think this is a game in which the advantage when it comes to head coaches is going to be on the Eagles' side. I think the roster, the Eagles have the advantage. But I agree with your point, Adam, exactly 100%. The person who has the most pressure on them in this Super Bowl is Andy Reid. And what stands out to me is historically, Andy Reid has not succeeded in big games. There are a lot of playoff games he's won, but there are a number of do or die playoff games, obviously, that he has fallen short. NFC championship games, Super Bowls. There was a question a few years ago whether Andy Reid would go down as kind of the Dan Marino of head coaches, someone who had this illustrious career but could never win the big one. He finally broke through with Patrick Mahomes a few years ago. But I still have my doubts about whether Andy Reid is still a good big game head coach. It's still to be determined in my mind. Obviously, when you have the better quarterback, you're supposed to win. Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in this game. Obviously, when he's 100%, we'll see how effective he is with that ankle. But to me, Andy Reid still has something to prove. Now, you get 2 Super Bowl wins. It vaults you into a different conversation. He's still going to be in the Hall of Fame no matter what. But it changes the narrative, and I think he needs that. And going up against the Eagles would be a perfect bookend to his career. I'm not saying he's going to retire anytime soon, but it certainly just completes the narrative. He vaults himself into this superstar elevated status and does it against his former franchise. Another major storyline for this one is a fun one. Obviously has been brought up ad nauseum by all of the sports media outlets throughout the last 2 weeks, and that is the Kelce Bowl. Travis Kelce versus Jason Kelce. Their mom has been an unbelievable interview, has been a great sport as she's been on everything from Good Morning America to Michael Irvin on the NFL Network, which was a riot to see that interview. But Blees, as a casual fan, is this something that's already kind of jumped the shark for you? Like, have you had enough of the Kelsey Bowl, or are you actually interested in NFL history? Two brothers playing against each other in the Super Bowl for the first time ever. Is it something that actually captures your interest, or is it something in which you're like, yeah, that's great, we can move on to the next storyline?
Yeah, what I was interested in is can she, like, with the rules, flip the coin? I know that there was talk about her like flipping the coin, and I was just wondering, like, do the rules allow that for someone to flip the coin? And could she do that? I think that would be pretty cool if she
Well,
could flip
first of
the
all,
coin.
that is awesome. I hadn't heard that. That's so cool that you bring that up. That would had been mentioned. Usually, there is some kind of designated person who flips the coin. You think back to years past. George H.W. Bush, when he was still alive, flipped the coin at one Super Bowl. So usually, it's designated for some kind of noteworthy person. If there hasn't been someone who's been given that designation yet, if it was just going to be the head referee, I feel like that would be an awesome opportunity for, I believe it's Donna Kelsey, to get her moment of fame. I think that's a great call, Blees. But again, to the question, beyond that, does the storyline hold interest for you? Is it something that you're going to be watching, say, after the game ends? Do you want to see that Kelsey hug at the end of the game, no matter who wins?
Yeah, I mean, they have the podcast. I think they're brothers at the end of the day. I think it would be a bigger storyline if they were on the field at the same time. Like if you had like a Stephon Diggs and Trayvon Diggs kind of situation where you could possibly be covering your brother, but the fact that they're both on offense and they won't be on the field at the same time doesn't hold as much weight for me. I mean, it's a cool storyline, I guess, but yeah, I think the shark has jumped on that for me. But if they were on the field at the same time, I think that would be way more impactful for me.
It's a great call. I completely agree with you on that. One last storyline, and then we'll get to our game picks around here. But before we do, I definitely want to make note of what is probably the most important storyline from the Super Bowl, and that's the fact that two African American quarterbacks will be the starting quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. And if you don't think that's significant, just go through the history of the NFL and for how long African Americans literally weren't given the opportunity to try out for the position, being told they weren't smart enough for the position, that they were supposed to play running back, wide receiver. That was what their skill set was fitted to. Now you see maybe the best quarterback of the modern era. Obviously, Tom Brady is the GOAT, but Patrick Mahomes is redefining the position. Jalen Hurts went from national champion to doubted to transfer to Heisman candidate, and now starting in a Super Bowl. Two great stories, two young men who represent their universities, their families, their teams incredibly well, and represent this moment in history really well. I think back to the Super Bowl between the Colts and the Bears, how important it was to have Tony Dungy and Lovie Smith representing African American head coaches. We see the fallout over the last few years of what that's meant and how little progress has been made in the NFL. I'm happy to say the same thing won't occur when it comes to the quarterback position in the NFL, because the age of the classic white guy quarterback being the starting quarterback for all 32 teams, that is over, dead, and gone, and a good thing. So happy to note that is one of the major storylines of the Super Bowl, because Andy Reid and Travis Kelce and Jason Kelce, those are all fine and dandy, but making some history for the right reasons, that's a great thing for the NFL. Now, let's get into our picks for this Super Bowl. I know I mentioned those gambling trends a moment ago. One more time, the Eagles right now are a 1.5 favorite. The over-under is set at 51 points. If you want to get all of our picks all in one place, make sure you go to our website, buttfumblesports.com, and sign up for that free newsletter. It'll come out Friday morning with all of our notes, trends, all of our picks,